Hello everybody. Could you please advance to the next slide? Okay, well, this is not important, so you can go to the first. Okay, so for the workshop goals, basically what the one back, please. Can you go back? Yes, okay. So basically for this workshop, what I wanted to introduce is which are these problems about integrating different standards and technologies, which standard technology we introduce, integrated in this project, BCare, which was the purpose for these technologies to be there. And finally, to give some insights on which is our experience about what problems, recommendations we derive from all the work that we have been doing during all this year. Next slide, please. So BCare is a very complex system integrating a lot of services. It is structured in this layer approach, which has three different groups. So the context integration, which basically is at the house of the patient, is the one that is acquiring data that is then used by the different layers to derive all this processing and knowledge. This intelligent and reasoning and adaptation is really the brain of BCare, the one that is doing everything. The knowledge layer, Jim presented a little bit about what recommendations and what processing is done there. The pathway layer was also introduced, how we derive these treatments as pathways, a model with modeling notation language like BPMN. And the coaching layer is the one that is really translated these pathways into these actions that are in the agenda for the patient, these activities that the patient has to do every day. Finally, we have this exploitation layer where we have all the interaction with the user, where really the coach is giving feedback to the user and the user is interfacing with the coach. The security is already integrated in this layer approach. So this is something that is transversal to all the layers. All the services from the beginning were integrated with security in mind, and we have very strong security applied in here. Every application can be built. I mean, we can extend these functionalities in BCare by producing new applications using one or different services in all this stack by means of some integration APIs that we have that are called the BCare as a service that we introduced yesterday, so I won't go directly into the details. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the technologies, we mentioned mostly all of these technologies yesterday, but for those that were not there, in the sensor layer, we use mainly Bluetooth to interface with devices, medical devices, blood pressure cuffs, weight scales, heart rate monitor, etc. Two different IoT platforms that help us integrating these services into BCare. And one example of these sensors that we are using is the log system produced by my company, which is built on top of Fireware, one of these IoT platforms, and is providing not only indoor location services, but some processing about the data to derive some basic behaviors of the patient. The middleware layer, we have this main component, which is the MQTT that we also introduced yesterday, which is what helps us communicating everything within the system. And is where the integration is really taking place for everything. In the knowledge layer, I think that is missing these layers here. Sorry, I didn't do it intentionally. Jim already introduced that it is doing some reasoning, but when we talk about technology, we have different AI libraries that are doing the job in the background. For the pathway layer, these pathways are modeled using BPMN, but the BPMN is only the way we build this in a graphical manner. When we have to execute these pathways, they have to be transformed into file resources, which are used by the coaching layer and the knowledge layer to really derive the actions that they have to be done by the patient. Also, the coaching layer, well, is based on Kiola, which is a product produced by our colleague, AIT. It is the main interface for the professional interfaces, where the doctor interface with the system, and the ones that are also creating all interactions in the virtual coach to interact directly with the patient according to these pathway definitions. Finally, this flotation layer is a set of devices, mainly an avatar built on a tablet, or interfaces built on set-top boxes, just to use the television with a Kinect for detecting movement. Security, also explained yesterday, is OAuth 2 based, so we have access tokens that are issued for all the services, and this really control how the data is flowing and which services can access the data, because not all services are allowed to receive some pieces of information. Additionally to that, we have some support tools which are not strictly part of BCare, but that help us coping with BCare and maintaining life, which is Docker and Portainer for the management of the services, the scalability, and also for updating these services live. One stack for monitoring these services to make sure that they don't go offline without noticing that. Next slide, please. So I also introduced this yesterday, so I won't go into the details of what these services are doing, but the main topics here is that we have a system that is distributed. Part of the system is at the house, not basically all the monitoring, context aware, and some basic processing is done at the devices that are deployed at the house of the patient. And the shared services, or the services that are used for all the patients, are cloud-based. All the integration is focused on this component, the MQTT broker, which is really helpful, and using it has really helped us integrating legacy applications that were existing before the project even existed. Next, please, the animations. Okay, so 2 more. So in the end, as the host already explained, this is not only about technical integration, but also about social integration. In the end, this system has to be used by final users, and final users in this context are mainly the patient and the carer. The carer in this context also is the doctor. So we try to create interfaces that are simple and are constrained to at most one device. So users can really focus on doing the rehabilitation process and not to get confused with too many applications and different devices. I won't go into detail because I think that there are speeches going into detail about the virtual coach and the rehabilitation games. And if you advance the next animation, please. Also, we have these interfaces for the professionals, for the doctor, where they can really create this prescription for the treatments, and they can see some insights on how this rehabilitation process is going. Next, please. Well, this is the last slide. So these are some of the key lessons that we have learned during this project. So as I mentioned, we are integrating services that were also present in, already done before the project started. So to make the integration and the interoperability between the services, we had to apply some basic semantics, but semantics are not really easy to use by everybody because they are complex to understand. So one thing that is really important is that we have clear guidelines on how to use semantics, with kind of ontologies or models we are going to apply. And for new developers wanting to integrate services, how they can really use the models that we are defining or using in our system. The second consideration is about security. Security with introduction of the GDPR a few years back is now key because data cannot be shared or used or even processed if you don't have consent. So especially you cannot disclose data to users or actors in the system that are not really meant to see that information. So security has to be there by design from the beginning, and strict policies to access the data have to be implemented. Also about quality of service in this context, we are using a virtual coach which is giving recommendations, but some recommendations can be more important or have a higher priority than other ones. For example, I could say it's not the same to give a reminder for medication intake than if you are doing exercise and the heart rate is going out of bounds to suggest the patient to stop the rehabilitation. But we found in the beginning that we were simply just sending this kind of information to the patient, but due to a constraint in the network, because there was no connectivity at that moment, or because the interaction device was in a sleep mode or stop, these recommendations were arriving probably one day later when they don't really make sense. So in this regard, it is also advisable to define which kind of information is important that has to be really kept inside of the system, whether the interaction devices are on or not, and also implement some retention policies, define the time frame at which some data makes sense. Final, but probably the more important consideration is the use of mobile devices. Every system nowadays uses mobile devices, but the operative system that these devices implement have very huge restrictions on the use of the battery. So normally when you want to make a monitoring application, if it goes background, probably the operative system will kill the applications and you start losing data. I think my colleague Mirza will elaborate a little bit on that later on. But not only make sure these applications are kept running every time without risking a drain of the battery. Also, applications are updated normally in a frequent manner. And we need to have some kind of unattended and remote update mechanism, especially when these devices are at the home of the patient, because these patients are elder, are not really able to manipulate these devices to do these actualizations. I think my colleague Rocío, if she's on the audience, can tell more about that, about the experience in Bilbao with the trials that we did. And this would be something that is really a must to be able to change the software with the consent of the patient, of course, but doing it remotely. The last consideration is basically to make sure that devices that are doing monitoring of data, that they are working at every time they need to be. So to have this monitoring strategy to make sure that these devices are not offline and we are losing data. That's everything on my side.